Hello, everybody, and welcome. I'm Kim Daniels, the director of Georgetown's Initiative on Catholic Social Thought and Public Life, and we're so happy to have so many of you with us here in person in Georgetown's ICC auditorium. I also want to say a special welcome to the 2,600 of you joining us online. We've had a remarkable response to this timely dialogue. We're so glad to be sponsoring tonight's dialogue, co-sponsoring it with the Berkeley Center for Religion, Peace, and World Affairs. And of course, we planned this gathering long before the passing of Pope Francis. And on Tuesday, May 6th, we're going to be holding a Dahlgren dialogue with Georgetown's Office of Mission and Ministry on remembering Pope Francis, continuing his mission, which more fully looks back at his leadership and the contributions that he's made. And we'll have Sister Norma Pimentel, Andrew Prevost, Rabbi Abraham Skorka, and Ann Thompson with us. But we're so grateful here tonight that we were able to have this conversation as an opportunity to reflect on one of Francis's most celebrated contributions to Catholic social teaching, his landmark encyclical Laudato Si, and the emphasis it had on the idea shared with Teilhard de Chardin that everything is connected. I remember standing in St. Peter's Square when Pope Francis was elected 12 years ago, and the feeling of hope we had that night. Looking back now, I'm so grateful for Pope Francis' witness and his leadership and his dynamic and hopeful vision of a church that is a home with open doors for everybody, with a special focus on those lying wounded by the roadside and most in need of mercy and accompaniment. I'm also so grateful for the emphasis that he provided to Catholic social teaching, the way he strengthened its presence in public life, and in particular, the way that he highlighted the need for us to care for God's creation. So given this current context, I'd like us to begin at first with a prayer for Pope Francis and for the Church, and it's taken from the novena that the whole Church prays for the repose of Francis's soul in these 9 days following his funeral. So please join with me in the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit, amen. Eternal rest grant unto him, O Lord, and let perpetual light shine upon him. O God, who chose your servant Pope Francis from among your priests and endowed him with pontifical dignity in the apostolic priesthood, grant, we pray, that he may also be admitted to their company forever. Through Christ our Lord, amen. So now tonight, let's turn to our conversation. We have four remarkable leaders with us here to reflect on Laudato Si, Teilhard de Chardin, and the influence of Pope Francis. First, Sister Ilia Delio is the Franciscan sister of Washington, D.C., and holds the Josephine C. Connolly Endowed Chair in Theology at Villanova University. She's the author of more than 24 books, including From Teilhard to Omega, Co-Creating an Unfinished Universe. Delio speaks both nationally and internationally on topics such as quantum physics, artificial intelligence, evolution, and the importance and relevance of these fields for Christianity. Diana Marin is the program manager for young adult mobilization at the Catholic Climate Covenant. Marin previously served as theologian in residence for the Nuns and Nuns Land Justice Project, convening Catholic sisters and millennial nuns in conversations on eco-theology. Sister Libby Osgood is a religious sister with the Congregation of Notre Dame de Montreal, an associate professor of sustainable design engineering at the University of Prince Edward Island, and a former aerospace engineer. Her research focuses on engineering pedagogy, sustainability, and faith and science, and she co-edited a book of hours, which collects the writings of Father Pierre Teilhard de Chardin into prayers. And finally, Frank Frost, our good friend, is the director of the film Teilhard, Visionary Scientist, a documentary that explores the life and legacy of Teilhard, an early 20th century French Jesuit priest and scientist. Frost and his wife Mary lead Frank Frost Productions, an award-winning film and television production company that produces independent documentaries for national broadcast. So in light of the past week and everything that has happened with the passing of Pope Francis, I want to start by asking each one of you this opening question, and we'll start with you, Frank. As we remember the powerful legacy of Pope Francis and around the 10th anniversary of his remarkable encyclical Laudato Si, help us understand what makes that encyclical so significant, especially around its emphasis shared with Teilhard that everything is connected.
Well, you've kind of answered the question in your question. But first thing I would point out is when he was newly elected, this Pope chose the name Francis to identify with Francis of Assisi, for begin his love of nature and care for the poor. And then that became something that he taught and lived. And it's the fact that he both taught and lived it that is, I think makes it powerful. I could say more, but I think we want to be short tonight.
Okay, that's wonderful. That's a great way to get us started. Sister Elio, how about you? How do you see Pope Francis, Teilhard, and Laudato Si connected in this conversation here tonight?
Well, I think Laudato Si is really a landmark encyclical insofar as sort of the first encyclical that did not really focus within the church, but took an outward vision of the whole earth community, something that would be very akin to Teilhard's vision as well, and the deep sense of a planetized community, that we belong together, which Pope Francis and Teilhard would envision as the body of Christ. So I think Laudato Si is a remarkable document that we have yet to really fully understand for our time.
Thank you. Diana, how about you? How do you see Pope Francis in our conversation here tonight? How do you see Laudato Si and Teilhard connected here?
So Laudato Si was written for everyone. It's a letter to all of us, and including to our legislators. Pope Francis is the first Pope to have a conversation in front of Congress people, and he did so in June of 2015, or excuse me, September of 2015, a few months after Laudato Si. And in those remarks, he brings up the importance of courageous action. So I see the continual role of Pope Francis's legacy with Laudato Si and calling into action our role within legislation and uplifting the role of advocacy within our church.
I feel like that's something Francis said all the time, right? It's about words. It's not just about words, excuse me. It's about action. It's about following up on it. Thank you. Libby, how about yourself? How do you see Pope Francis' impact here tonight on our conversation with Laudato Si, with Teilhard?
Well, I think it's a beautiful moment for Teilhard first because Pope Francis references him in chapter 2. So for someone who was, disregarded by Catholicism for so long, it's kind of a shining moment for Teilhard, which I really like. And I especially love that the phrase "our common home" is not the environment, it's our. It's showing how we're all so intricately connected with the people across the world as well as the environment coming together.
So it's our common home. It's not just, it's something that we share together. I think that's wonderful. Thank you. So we're obviously remembering Pope Francis tonight. We're marking the 10th anniversary of Laudato Si, but also the 70th anniversary of the death of Teilhard de Chardin, whose ideas inspired many parts of Pope Francis' encyclical. Teilhard is often remembered for his focus on the unity of all life coalescing in Christ, and this point is seen repeated in Francis' insistence, as we said, that everything is connected. The life of the church, the life of our societies, and the life of the natural world are all connected and share in the life of God. So before we continue this conversation, we are happy to show a clip from Frank's film, Teilhard, Visionary Scientist. Frank, tell us a little bit about your and Mary's film and its importance now.
Thank you. It's a great pleasure to be here. Thank you so much to the initiative. We're sitting in an auditorium at Georgetown University, and so the first thing I want to say is that Georgetown University, especially through its emeritus president, Jack DeGioia, was the first supporter and the most faithful supporter of our project over 15 years. So thank you, Georgetown. Thank you, Dr. DeGioia. And of course, I want to make sure that I credit my producer, who's also my wife, and the fantastic editor that brought it home. Thank you, Bob. Thank you. So we're going to offer you 8 minutes from this film, basically to refresh your memory if you've already seen the film. And if you haven't seen the film, maybe this will entice you to watch it. What you should know if you haven't seen it is that this film is not a theological or philosophical lecture. It's a human story of a very complex person who struggled in many ways throughout his life, particularly with the church. And he thought outside the box, and he paid a price for it. And the audience for the film, like the audience that Pope Francis called to Laudato Si, is for the whole world. So this is not meant for Catholics alone. Welcome, Catholics are welcome. But it's made for a general audience, and that was why it was released on PBS.
All right, thank you very much. Let's get started.
Someday, after we have mastered the winds, the waves, the tides, and gravity, we shall harness for God the energies of love. And then, for the second time in the history of the world, we will have discovered fire.
He is a Jesuit priest, and yet he's a scientist.
He was a paleontologist dedicated with equal passion to God and to the earth. His new insights into evolution create conflict with religious authorities.
Teilhard de Chardin, he said we need a new God.
His life is rich with human drama.
From the time he was a very young child, he became frightened to death of perishability. He spent almost all the rest of his life trying to tie himself to something that does not perish.
Teilhard de Chardin establishes close relationships with several women over the course of his life.
I have experienced no form of self-development without some feminine eye turned on me, some feminine influence at work.
Teilhard leaves a profound legacy in a world starving for hope and love, recognizing the primacy of spirit amidst a rapidly transforming technology.
This man has given us a vision of hope that really is hope, and not pipe dreams. That is the stuff of prophets.
In a little park in the town of Clermont-Ferrand, France, across the street from where his family once lived, there stands a sculpture erected by the city in Teilhard's honor after his death. It is the image of Jacob wrestling with the angel, also called Wrestling with God, inspired by the 32nd chapter of Genesis. And on the pedestal of the statue are inscribed the words spirit and matter, words which characterize Teilhard's interior struggle to reconcile his love of nature and his love of the divine spirit. And this inner struggle began early in his precocious life, before he could even begin to understand or articulate it. He was sitting by the fireplace, as he remembers.
I was 5 or 6. My mother had snipped off a few of my curls. I picked one up and held it close to the fire. The hair was burnt up in a fraction of a second. A terrible grief assailed me. I had learned that I was perishable.
What does he do in reaction? He starts a search. Lifelong, as it turns out, for things that are lasting and indestructible.
What happens is a switch around when he discovers evolution.
At first, I was far from understanding and appreciating the importance of the change I was undergoing. All that I can remember of those days, apart from that magic word evolution, which haunted my thoughts like a tune, all that I can remember is the extraordinary solidity and intensity I found in the English countryside, particularly at sunset when the Sussex woods were charged with all that fossil life which I was then hunting for.
For Teilhard, God is totally present in the physical world around him, throbbing with divine energy. But this is not the world or the God that he is being taught.
What Teilhard did is to take an evolutionary interpretation of the great chain of being. Instead of the great chain of being eternally fixed, it's an ongoing process.
The world suddenly acquires a new dimension for Teilhard. In his never-ending search for the permanent, the imperishable, Teilhard reaches beyond the evolution of species described by Darwin and beyond the theories of the great French evolutionist Jean-Baptiste Lamarck and of philosopher Henri Bergson. Teilhard's vision gives primacy to the evolution of consciousness, which reaches its highest stage in human self-reflective consciousness with its capacity for love and free choice, and ultimately bends toward a point in the deep future Teilhard calls Omega. This is the defining nature of evolution as understood by Teilhard.
Until that time, my education and my religion had always led me obediently to accept, without much reflection, a fundamental difference between spirit and matter, between soul and body, between unconscious and conscious.
The idea of soul and body has plagued philosophy since its inception. Teilhard, I think, saw a solution to this problem in two ways. Number one, he claimed that matter is essentially energy. Thank you, Albert Einstein. But that energy was quintessentially spirit. And so he claimed that the universe is ultimately a spiritual universe. Ultimately, the stuff of reality is spirit.
Spirit and matter. These were no longer two separate things, but two states or two aspects of one and the same cosmic stuff.
This is one of the most intriguing things about Teilhard. Spirit matter, the psychic dimension of the material world, that matter is not dead, it's not inanimate, evolution is not purposeless or random, but it is infused with spirit.
Teilhard is somebody who bridges worlds of theology and science and somehow grasp what the mystic and what the astrophysicists are talking about and sees a convergence.
Evolution is creation, an unfinished creation. The process of creation continues even now.
This man has given us a vision of hope that really is hope and not pipe dreams. And that is the stuff of prophets. That is the stuff of people who change the world.
Laudato Si, the Pope's encyclical on the environment, is, as one of the leading environmentalists says, the most important document of the 21st century.
Frank, that's just such a remarkable, thank you for that clip. It's such a remarkable film. If you haven't had a chance to see it, I hope you get the chance to see it. I love the line that you have in there that you've drawn out, that Teilhard bridges theology and science. And I wonder if you could help us talk about that a little bit. He opened the church to engagement with modern science, in a sense. Around this 10th anniversary of Laudato Si, what can we learn from that bridging between theology and science, especially related to the kind of pressing ecological issues we face?
Teilhard, as a child, loved the earth, loved finding plants and fossils and samples, and he learned at the feet of his mother a great devotion to Christ. So he had this tension when he joined the Jesuits that these were not quite compatible. This led him to really push to find the solution to the combination of spirit and matter, which we see somewhat in the film, but he arrived at that conclusion with the, he was desperate once he discovered that, to have the church know that they now had a way to bridge the gap between scientists and the church. So science could talk to the church, and the church could talk to science. And the failure throughout all his life to convince the church that they had this treasure led to great distress for him. So as you heard in the film, for him, evolution was largely evolution of consciousness, and what that means for humans is self-reflective consciousness, which brings us a gift of freedom and love, but it also gives us the responsibility for the future of evolution. We are now co-creators of evolution, and we are now partially responsible for what happens on this planet. And I have to just say that in this hall that you all walked in, I'm sure you looked at it carefully before you came down the stairs under the arch. There's a quote there from Teilhard de Chardin, which kind of says this same thing. And if they don't mind, I'm going to read that. The age of nations is past. It remains for us now, if we are not to perish, is to set aside ancient prejudices and to build the earth. I think that says a lot of what Laudato Si is also saying.
Absolutely, and I want to maybe build on that for a second. We talk about what this current moment, what we face in this current moment as a church, as a world. You talk about the fact that we have so much to learn from Teilhard. What else do we still stand to learn from Teilhard in this particular present moment? What can his life and thought contribute to the church's response to everything we're facing at a moment, in fact, with Pope Francis passing, where it's kind of a moment of recollection, where we're sitting here saying, how do we pause and step back? Put that in a frame for us.
The first thing I would say is the church really needs to get into its preaching cosmogenesis, a cosmic evolutionary thought into its theology. Mary and I, over the years of producing this film, regularly would go to hear the homilies, and we would say, it's not getting there. And obviously this means that seminarians need to learn science and the importance of science. And the recently completed synod in its report asked for that. You were there, so you know that. And so I think that's the first and most important thing that we need, is to simply have the church recognize this and put it into practice through our normal preaching.
Excellent. Thanks so much, Frank, and we'll come back to you in a second. Sister Ilya, I want to go to you for a second. You are one of the world's leading scholars of Teilhard. You've said that Teilhard reminds us that we don't need so much a teaching church, but a living church. What does this mean for the ecological movement, for the church's engagement with the broader environmental movement around the world, for our everyday practice of faith?
Yeah, thanks. I think we can address that question maybe just by beginning with the relationships between science and religion, because Teilhard was living in a church that was, the age of Saint Therese, the end of modernism, the age of ultramontanism. And so it was a church that was steeped in hierarchy, with abstract doctrines. So the Denziger Manual was still taught for theology, and he felt that the church had become too out of touch with the world. And as a scientist, he was keenly aware of the way science had literally changed the geometry of everything we know about this world. So he felt there was, a growing disconnect between the institutional church and the world that was now in formation. And so he began to realize that science and religion must be brought into a unified field of knowledge in order for the church itself to really become fully alive and with the capacity of what it can do. And this is what he thought, that he wanted to not think in institutional terms. He was a biologist, so he thought in organic terms. In a sense, something was taking shape in evolution. Something was being born. And just as life itself comes together, that's how he envisioned the church. Something is coming together and being born, which is, in a sense, the Christ. So he was very Pauline in his theology. And he saw that Christ in formation through the many, many epochs of evolution, through all strands of matter. And he thought that evolution itself was the emergence into complexity, greater levels of unified matter and consciousness. And therefore, he saw the church as, you might say, being the head or the cephalus of a body in formation. So in this way, even though Teilhard never used this term, the universe is sort of like a Theotokos, right? Mother Earth, giving birth to, new life. And he thought that the church should not be thought just of as a rigid institution with doctrines and creeds that he thought were too abstract, but a living church like a phylum, like the church leading the whole of evolution into a new type of community, a new type of humanity, a new type of planetized life. And therefore, he thought that, what it would mean to be part of a new church like this. He thought worship was too, as Frank said, it was too out of date. He said we need a renewal of our worship and our liturgy to realize that we are being baptized into evolution, that, to partake of the Eucharist is to become the part of a living body of Christ. So to be engaged in building up this universe into something that is more unified, more just, more peaceful. And therefore, it's all about relationality through and through. So in his view, something is taking shape, something is being born. The church is to be, in a sense, right at the heart of that life of what is being born. And he has a very vast, consciousness of church as a growing convergence. I mean, even his understanding of Christ, I think, grows into kind of more than institution alone, something, a type of unified being in love that all people, all planetary life is part of. So,
well, thank you for that. And let me shift gears a little bit on that to follow up. When Pope Francis took the name Francis 12 years ago, you commented that it was clear he'd been inspired, as so many of us know, by St. Francis of Assisi, who not only saw the interconnectedness of all life, but also was particularly moved by the suffering of the poor and vulnerable.
Right.
And I wonder how this theme of interconnectedness, relationality, as you just spoke about, obviously present in Laudato Si, present in Teilhard's ideas about the convergence of all things, how does that interact with the realities of marginalization in our world?
Right. So I think there's several things going on here. One is that Teilhard was brought up in scholastic theology and realized that scholastic theology was too abstract for the world we now live in. And so he began to shift his understanding. His emphasis on matter gave rise to a new understanding of what is taking place, including his theology, his understanding of God. And so very much, Francis of Assisi was a very simple man. And like Teilhard, he had a great love of matter. But Francis was not trained in Latin or Neoplatonism, and so for him, he understood through incarnation that God has taken on matter. God is in matter, matter matters to God. And that's very much in tune with Teilhard's thinking as well. So for both, it's a God, we might say, who is humble, a God who is bent over in love. Love becomes the primary energy, the primary driving force of all the deep interconnectedness of this planet. And therefore, if God is in everything and in everyone, then those left outside of the community is also, you might say, leaving God outside as well. And therefore, it led Francis to go out, to the margins, to be where the poor are, to be, in a sense, bringing that love of God to all peoples. And I see the same thing with Pope Francis as well, and his remarkable. I mean, Pope Francis did what St. Francis was, and that was live the gospel. He didn't preach the gospel. It was, you preach by your actions and use words when necessary. And I think that's Pope Francis. The kissing of the feet, with the women's inmates in Rome. He was always kissing feet, by the way. It reminds me very much of Francis kissing the leper. You know, those who have been left out, who have been thrown out of society for one reason or another, that's where Pope Francis went to, and that's what he calls us into as church, to be there on the margins. That's the only way community and this earth can grow into a more unified wholeness.
Thank you. Thanks so much for that. Diana, I'm going to turn to you now. In his message, it's really interesting to me that just a few months ago, Pope Francis said in his message to the General Assembly of the Pontifical Academy for Life, if we do not seriously analyze our profound resistance to change, both as a people and a society, we'll continue to squander, he said, the transformative potential of crises to reorient our consciences, to reorient our social practices. You work with young adults, and I wonder how we think about this in that context. How does this encourage them to do exactly the opposite, to harness the transformative power of the ecological crisis? And how are they leading efforts to do that? I was struck by the quote in the film that is hope that really is hope. Like, do you see that in the young people you work with around these issues?
Yeah, I so appreciate that question, and I'm holding on to that thought of this, how to not squander the potential for transformation. I have two colleagues that I work alongside, Emily and Henry, who I think about in raising this question. They had an opportunity while they were students at Creighton University to be in dialogue with Pope Francis, and they said, quote to him, that young people value authenticity and deplore hypocrisy. And they were speaking about that in terms of the church's role in uplifting Laudato Si, in uplifting Pope Francis's teachings. And I see in their message a hope and a real call to action in advocating for our church to fully live into that preaching, and also to not squander that potential for transformation. Young adults are really involved in advocacy. I mentioned within the church, we have young adults in our that I work alongside through Catholic Climate Covenant who advocate for science-backed targets for climate action within their dioceses. So encouraging bishops and diocesan leaders to make commitments to climate action. I've also, just earlier this month, got a chance to go to Sacramento where 400 youth, high school students and college students came together to advocate to their legislators for climate action. And the bills that they uplifted were around water protection, habitat protection, fire resilience, and also migration. And these were all bills that they themselves discerned and raised up. And they came together as a call to that 2 steps of love and action, going to the Capitol, even though they were nervous, even though from some of them it was really far away. They slept on the floors of parishes overnight if they were coming in from Southern California. And they came together in community to advocate for this, for these changes. So the hope that I see in young adults is rooted in action, but it also comes with a calling forth for all of our community to take action as well.
Well, I'm interested to, you're at Catholic Climate Covenant, and you look back 10 years ago when Laudato Si was introduced. What do you think about the reception of Laudato Si then? And you've talked about some elements of the response right now from young adults. Like, do you see a shift over that time? Can you talk a little bit about what it was like then and where we are today?
Yeah. So Laudato Si completely re-energized our church. When it came out, it gave so much hope, so much inspiration. I mentioned earlier in my earlier comments that Pope Francis, following the release of Laudato Si, came to U.S. Congress, spoke about the importance of climate action within our legislation, and also that had a global impact, and also influenced the Paris Accords and helped provide a role for religion to come to this global stage around what was then an even more challenging and polarized issue of climate change. When we look back at that time, we'll remember that climate change was seen as perhaps like a scientific issue. It was maybe not seen as like rooted there was debate around whether or not it was taking place. We now have much more commonality that climate change is in fact taking place. It is much more within our common conversation. And yet there is still that need to continue uplifting the role of Laudato Si and uplifting the need to bring this into common conversation. I think we also can't talk about Laudato Si without mentioning Laudato Deum, which is the follow-up to Laudato Si, released in 2023. And that particularly, it's a small addendum to Laudato Si that I highly recommend if you read if you haven't, but it calls particularly the US into, and the global community to take climate action, to take commitments to changing the crisis and addressing the crisis. And I think it stands out in tone. It is a force. It has a real strength to it, where Laudato Si is spiritual. It is it brings folks together. It has a quality of upliftment and mysticism. Laudate Deum is almost a reprimand, and it's saying like where that in some essences that potential for transformation has yet to be realized. And I'll note two things about Laudate Deum that I find particularly curious. The first footnote calls out uplifts the U.S. Catholic Conference of Bishops. It quotes from them, recognizing that the U.S. Catholic Conference of Bishops uplifted the importance of climate action and climate change, and it says that this is something that we do need to take action on. And it was I believe, a 2021 or 2020 comment. So Pope Francis begins with bringing in the U.S. Church, and it also ends bringing in the U.S. The last footnote also calls into recognition that the U.S. is the greatest per capita emitter of carbon, and names that there is a particular responsibility for us in the U.S. To take climate action because of our contributions to climate change. So, yeah.
And I thought that was so interesting, right, that Pope Francis really spoke as a moral voice, right? This is our responsibility. It's something that we hold in our hearts, and a responsibility for us to the world. Thank you for bringing that up. And thank you also to the Catholic Climate Covenant and Dan Mislin in particular, who's here with us tonight, for their leadership 10 years ago when bringing Laudato Si to the United States. I think that was a real service to the Church and to the U.S., so thank you, and thank you for being here, Diana. Sister Libby, let's talk to you now I want to talk a little bit about this idea of the technocratic paradigm. I feel like I'm among all these scientists here tonight, and I'm a little bit out of my depth. So I'm turning to you to sort of help us with this idea. Pope Francis really criticizes what he calls the technocratic paradigm, where the scientific process is used to gain control over various parts of our world when we're trying to solve certain problems. You have a book of meditation, a wonderful book of meditations on Teilhard's writings, where you call his spirituality one for people who love the world. I would love for you to talk a little bit more about that. How does this attitude of profound love differ from the kind of attitude behind this idea of the technocratic paradigm?
Sure, and that's such a beautifully packed question. So to start, for those who love the world was the inscription that Teilhard had in his Divine Milieu book. So when Sister Kathleen Degnan and I were compiling our Book of Hours, we took Teilhard's writings and letters and, searched out the prayers and put them into an order, psalms and different prayers. But as an engineer, we kind of made sense of it. I turned it into a system. But for those who are spiritual, it's a beautiful way to pray with Teilhard. So as you talk about being uncomfortable being around a scientist, as an engineer, I'm not a theologian. So I'm sitting at this table as a practitioner. And as an engineer, we apply. Everything is about the application in the world. And so the technocratic paradigm is essentially that idea that we are
we allow technology to start making the decisions. We get so excited with the notion of technology that it becomes the driver's seat. And I think what Teilhard teaches us and Pope Francis in Laudato Si is that nothing is an all or nothing. We can't, technology is fun, technology is exciting, it's a toy that you get to learn, but when you let it start to make the decisions and we step back the sacredness of people, of the environment, that's when we start to lose the essence of all that is so great about both the encyclical and it allows technology to drive us, which is not what we want.
Absolutely, absolutely. I think Pope Francis often talked about the idea of conversion of heart, right? That it wasn't about words on a page, it was more about really this idea of converting your heart regardless of what the issue was about. And so I love that about your work in particular. How do you think some of Teilhard's ideas, his influences, his insights, might help jumpstart the reception of Laudato Si and the reception of these ideas generally today?
Well, I think Teilhard is not credited for the amount of influence that he's had on the world. And I'd love to just throw out a couple of people that are the theologians today that we listen to so much that don't credit him, because they might not even know that their ideas are built on things that he came up with. That, as Sister Kathleen Degnan talks about, we're in this third wave of Teilhard right now, that there's these different waves that have come through of people who have just adopted what he's talked about, whether or not they give him credit, because for a while it wasn't quite so popular. But I think Teilhard has so much to teach us that I kind of consider him like my grandfather, as he's the spiritual master. As I read what he talks about, if you read the Book of Hours, you start to realize you can only get about 3 quotes in, and then you're satiated for the prayer for the day, because there's so much depth to what he talks about, and to continue to drive us and to fuel us forward. I think one thing that we have to look at is, I teach engineering, I teach sustainable design engineering. And so my students are looking at coming up with sustainable solutions for the world, and what are the ways in which we can do better. And it's interesting because engineering in its essence is so anthropocentric. Mm-hmm. It's so human-centered. I define engineering as solving problems to help people. Wait, to help people? What? Right, like that's so good. And yet it's so people-centered. And Pope Francis talks quite a bit about anthropocentrism in Laudato Si as well, and the dangers of that. And Diana, I'm so glad you mentioned Laudate Deum, because when I talk about that, I love to say, he said, y'all aren't listening. And he did it forcefully. And yeah, we aren't. We really aren't. And why? It's been 10 years. Why don't I hear this preached from the pulpit, as you said, Frank? Like, I should hear this more and more frequently. So I think Teilhard is in much of Laudato Si and is in much of our regular spiritual reading now, that if you start to look for him, you're going to see him.
Absolutely. Thank you very much for that.
Yeah.
Sister Julia, I would love to turn to you. We'll have a little bit more of a general conversation now, and then we'll turn to questions from the audience in a little bit. But I'd love to turn to you for just to sort of answer a question we've had. Some people have read some of Teilhard's correspondence, some of his lesser-known works, pointed out lines that they claim indicate views of racial inferiority and even eugenicist principles. What do you make of these claims, and how should these kinds of debates affect our understanding of Teilhard?
Yes, I am very aware of one author in particular has written about 7 or 8 articles, and not he alone, but others as well, claiming that Teilhard was a racist, a eugenicist, and a sympathizer of totalitarian or communist movements. So, I was thinking about this question, and maybe this is how I'd like to address it. Because when I read those articles, I don't recognize Teilhard in them. There's something else going on there. Let me just put this in a different framework. I grew up near New York City. And, if you go to New York City and you stand on the corner of 42nd Street, you're just like submerged with people all around, And then you begin to notice, that guy's, poor and he's sitting, he looks homeless. And that one looks like a business person. And we start naming and identifying people and then we're going to make our selections, how we're going to, cross the street, etc. Teilhard didn't live on 42nd Street. He went to the Empire State Building and went to the top floor. And he looked from the Empire State Building over the vast panorama of Manhattan. And he saw that this whole thing was in movement. And so one thing with Teilhard is you have to change your perspective when you read him. We're reading him as single individuals on the ground and saying, oh, look what he says about the Chinese and about the yellow race. He seems to be putting them down. Is he a racist? Is he saying that whites are more superior than Chinese or brown people or black people? Is he giving, a priority to the white race as being superior? Absolutely not. He is looking as an observer from a vantage point of looking at the whole and saying, yeah, at my sojourns, I noticed, with my, as I was visiting through China, that there were yellow races and they're a little bit backwards in what they're doing, but, that's okay. You know why? Because we're all in movement. And that is the beauty of Teilhard. We are not static. He didn't even think the human phenomenon was the last species. We are a human phenomenon. We are a species in evolution, which means the whole species is changing. So yes, there are differences, and I think we could all note there are differences. I mean, Ibrahim Zendi would say we're all racist in some way. We all notice that there are differences in race. That's not the point for Teilhard. What he did say is that yes, these people here, may be a little bit backwards. These people here may be a little bit this. They're observations. He was an historical person living within a period of history, way before the Civil Rights Movement, way before Black Lives Matter. So I really don't like reading back into Teilhard, something that we now are familiar with today. He was living from the perspective of a broad understanding of evolution as being in movement. Something is taking place, which means if you follow through with him, we are all going to change into some type of new personhood. And I think, honestly, going back to the technology question, if we had listened to Teilhard a little earlier on, we might have done even more, more justice in terms of what we are together collectively, because he saw that technology is converging us on a new level. We're coming to a new awareness of what? Belonging to a whole. And therefore, he moves beyond the question of racism as being sort of ontologically distinct. And he's saying, no, we're not that. We do have distinctions, but they don't weigh us down. We are a people in movement. And therefore, he saw us moving towards what he called the ultra-human. What does the ultra-human look like? The homo progressivus. So I don't think the charge of racism can be justified in any way, because it's not reading Teilhard, as someone who looked at this broad movement in evolution, because we're moving towards what he called the omega point, right? There's something taking shape here. Despite all our differences, in fact, in light of all our differences, that is the beauty, by the way, because union differentiates. And the more we are united, the more we're differentiated in our uniqueness. And therefore, the beauty of the whole is precisely in the richness of the diversity, not in some homogeneous, flattening out of what we are. And second, he was a scientist, right? So eugenics is what science does. You always want to find a cure. I mean, I don't know any scientist would say, yeah, well, they have a deadly disease. Let them just go, let nature take its course. You're going to want to try everything, which is exactly what he said. We must try everything. Not because we want to be superior, but because we want to heal ourselves to become more whole, so that we may, in a sense, converge into a greater unity up ahead. And that's exactly why he looked to these totalitarian movements like communism or Nazism, and he said, we have the power to converge. That is, in a sense, what I see in these movements. But if we don't get a sense of what we're about, we can turn into termites, which is what they're doing to us. So he saw that these movements can really reduce us to termite, what he called tertiary phenomenon. We just become little ants on a big anthill. And that's exactly what he was against. So I hope that kind of gets to your, that the charges against him they're read as individuals with individual concerns. Teilhard was a big thinker, and you must climb the Empire State Building and have a different perspective of the whole.
Thank you. Thank you very much for that. Frank, I want to turn to you now. You've heard a lot here in this conversation. I'd love for you to kind of reflect on what you've heard in particular, but most of all, I'd love to hear what you think about what you learned from the reception of your film, what you've learned through how you've been out and about promoting it, what you learned since its release, et cetera, and all you've heard here today.
Okay, I'd love to answer that, but first I want to say what a pleasure it's been to hear the different perspectives that we've heard here, and I wish we could have a much broader, longer conversation, because there's tons of stuff we haven't even touched on or can't get into depth on, but it's a good beginning, okay? So I'll talk about our film. First of all, it was an amazing experience. We started thinking we knew a man named Teilhard de Chardin. We were going to make a simple movie about him. And it was a constant revelation over the years as we tried to raise money and extended the length of our project. We learned more and more. So it was quite an adventure. And we learned along the way that there's a very deep and wide hunger for what Teilhard has to say, manifest by what's here and who else is online with us. Mary and I have made films for 40 years, or broadcast, and for many other things. And very rarely in the past have we gotten letters or emails to say what a good job. With this film, we've gotten hundreds, literally hundreds of emails and letters saying not what a, they said yes, it's a good film, but they were saying how deeply moved they were because it was important to them. And what this says to us is how they were hungry for Teilhard, and we're proud of the way that we could present that, so they could be hungry for Teilhard. A small manifestation of this interest is that within a couple of months after the time it was first released last May, we got inquiries from people, would they be allowed to translate it into their language? So in a matter of months, now we have subtitled versions in Mandarin, Arabic, Farsi, Turkish, Czech, and now we're working on, those were all done by the people who needed to have it done at their own expense. Now we're working on a film, a translation in Italian, and we'll soon have Spanish and other. But the hunger to show it to the people on the periphery is what I love. So in the Middle East and Northern Africa and China, Asia is just astounding to us, absolutely astounding.
Excellent, thank you. Diane, I want to turn to you real quickly for a question. We've talked about some of the awful injustices that divide us and the polarization in our world. I wonder if you could talk a little bit about how these ideas of Teilhard's, but especially in Laudato Si, can help us bridge these polarizations, can help us respond to injustice. Can you talk a little bit more about that?
So Laudato Si, as we mentioned, was written for everyone, and that's because the climate crisis affects all of us. And in this work with young adults, I've found that they truly care for uplifting how the church can respond to this particular moment of multiple divisions, and once that seems like it's getting progressively more fraught in each day. And I found that young adults are really eager to be in conversation about these divisions and to look at how our church upholds teachings that enable us to have dialogue. And Laudato Si, I hope that one of its legacies, I hope that Pope Francis's legacy through Laudato Si is that it encourages us to have dialogue. I think as we continue to have dialogue that is rooted in the best of Catholic social teaching, that upholds a vision of integral ecology, that uplifts both the cry of the earth and the cry of the poor, that in that mix, what is possible is that transformation, that what is possible is a continued renewal. So yeah, there's so much potential within that legacy of Laudato Si.
So this idea of continual renewal. Thank you. Thanks very much. And maybe one more question to you, Libby, and then we'll go to questions from the audience after that. I love this idea of Teilhard's of being loved, that we are loved into being, and I think, Sister Elia, this is from you, that we are loved into being at this moment just as we are by a God of unconditional love. I wonder if you could talk a little bit about what you think of when you think about that idea, right? That God is loving us into being, and that, and how does that kind of find expression in your writings and work?
Thank you. One of my favorite of Teilhard's quotes is and I'm misquoting it now. So he talks about if we ever really understood just how vast the universe is, how far apart the galaxies are, I think what he's talking about there, without question, is love. If we can ever really contemplate just how profoundly large our world is, our universe is, and how profoundly interconnected we all are, I really think that is speaking to, the bigness and the smallness of God being in everything that we do, connecting us all through all of time, that it's just so beautiful that he brings that out. And I have to say for myself, Teilhard is one who, he gave me permission as an aerospace engineer to also be a Catholic and to also live my faith. And I found his writings on my path towards becoming a sister. And so he then began to teach me how to be a religious as well. Because here he was being this big, brave person, saying these big, scary things and getting in so much trouble for it, and kept doing it and kept pushing, and yet somehow lived within his vows and said, it's too important to stay. I can't leave. I have to stay. I have to keep doing it. And I think there's so many levels of love there for his mission, but also feeling empowered. He said something like, I am a citizen from the future on a journey from the past, which is one that you just kind of paradoxically have to sit and think about. But it's just the whole story is a story of love.
Thank you. Thanks very much for that. I'd love to turn to questions from you all. So people with microphones in the aisles, please just raise your hand high if you have a question. Right here, Kira, thank you. Please identify yourselves when you ask your question. Thanks.
Good evening. My name is Catalina Villar. I was interested in the commentary about it being translated into so many languages, and how you're mentioning that clearly Laudato Si is written for everybody on the planet. So I'm interested to know if anybody in the panel can speak to, if we're thinking of interconnectedness and commonality, there are other systems of beliefs and religions that share this and that have stated this way before Christianity. So are you aware of any dialogue happening outside of the Teilhard universe within this dialogue, which of course he saw greater than that?
Sure, thank you very much.
Well, actually in his small essay, which is in his collection in Christianity and Evolution, it's called How I Believe. He describes his familiarity with Eastern religions and began to talk about why he thought the road of the West, why Christianity thought was a way to lead forward, not to the exclusion of other religions. And actually, from my perspective, I think Teilhard thought that Christianity was the religion of evolution. In other words, the principles of Christianity and the principles of evolution are coherent. They're the same. There's something going on between divinity and humanity, creative union, transcendence, etc. But he also thought that what we need is the convergence and dialogue of all world religions. So his understanding of the Christ was not institutional. It was organic. It was a body of Christ. And therefore, he was part of the World Parliaments of Religion. He gave a really wonderful talk there back in 1950. UNESCO in 1975 issued a fantastic statement on interplanetary spirituality based on Teilhard's talk. And what he envisioned is that the world's religions would begin to dialogue, cross-fertilize, and begin to help build together this earth. So his idea was faith in the development of the world, faith in God, and I would add, however we meet that God or that one. But what Teilhard really envisioned was a new religion of the earth, and that's actually the words he used. The old religions, he said, are passing away, and we need kind of a new commitment to the whole of which we're a part of. So I see him very much as a proponent of interreligious dialogue and wants us to go forward in building together the earth community.
There's a Yale Center for, what's the formal name of it?
Yeah, Forum on Religion and Ecology from Mary Evelyn Tucker and John Grimm.
And they are systematic in creating dialogue between religions of every variety. In our film, we interview a man and a Chinese woman scholar and a man. The woman scholar said that she translated the divine milieu into Chinese because she felt that that was a spirit that expressed Taoism. And our interview with our band said Taoism was led him to Teilhard de Chardin. So there's a lot of informal things going on and at least one formal organization.
Thank you. In the back?
Hi, my name is Gary Gardner, and I'm from Arlington. I spent a career in sustainability research. And so I find this fascinating, and thank you for a very stimulating set of presentations. But what comes to mind for me, what really jumps out, is what I see as a vast chasm between what Teilhard proposed, what he put out to the world, and what I knew as a sustainability researcher, where the issues are so many and so urgent. And it feels as though, you're talking about the top of the Empire State Building, we're talking about a vast cosmology, we're talking about what sounds like a really long-term project. How do you see bridging that gap between that incredible vision and the urgent needs that we have today?
Thank you. And Libby, let's go to you for that.
Yeah, I think it definitely is urgent. There's no question. And yet, I think what Teilhard contributes to this conversation is that he set it up, right? He began to get us thinking about this evolutive universe that we live in and how our spirituality is tied into that. So I think I don't see quite too big of a gap, especially when you get into many of his letters. He's got over 8,000 pages of letters and documents, and I find most of the essays that we know are the same old quotes that you hear over and over again. You've read The Divine Milieu, perhaps Human Phenomenon, but he's got so many additional letters that he's talked about, and in some of the letters to his friends, you get to hear this really beautiful perspective on how he feels about things. He doesn't talk about he doesn't really go hugely into environmental issues, but he is the one who began and spawned it all. So for example, Father Thomas Berry, and how many people took on what he did and continued to grow it. But I have to say, the subtext of all the things that he wrote have such a preciousness for the earth. I mean, you saw in the film about the rocks and the perishability, and even his hair burning and being like, oh no. But when you get into his letters, you hear about these beautiful descriptions of landscapes, of water, he really truly treasures the earth. And describes it in such beautiful ways. As he talks about being in Mongolia and just seeing the spiritual or the desert. So I think part of it is the subtext of what he's saying and how he's saying it. But he also gives us the challenge, and Pope Francis does this too, to say, this is yours now. I am beginning a thing, but you have to take this and run with it. You can't just sit back idly. He talks time and time again about how we can't be idle. We have to be workers in the field. We have to be doing whatever it is that we're doing to live broadly. So he says, my pen, God is the tip of my pen, my spade, my brush. So as a geologist in the field, he was doing what God was calling him to do. He was doing it when he was writing. So I think for the sustainability concepts, if that is what we are being called to do, then we have to do it with our whole force, with our whole being, to be able to look into it, just as he would have.
Thank you.
Can I just add something to
because I just want to say that there is, I mean, we can't be too naive about this, right? The question of sustainability, while Teilhard really was a child of the earth, and as Libby was saying, but he also recognized that we are religiously or spiritually disconnected. He thought that we're still too Neoplatonic. We're too heaven-oriented, too much transcendence. And we don't have a theology of the earth, an adequate theology. And this is one of the things he was trying to bring us to conscious awareness of, that our God is not up there, our God is here. So he spoke about the absolute of matter. But we haven't made that turn in the church. And we do have a tension between a Neoplatonism and otherworldliness, a spiritual priority over materiality in the church, and the need to really turn to a complete evolutionary, material, spiritual understanding of God in evolution. And until we do that, this has been a crisis in the making for like the last 600 years due to an ever-growing disconnect. And so Teilhard says there's two dimensions. There's withinness and withoutness. You can't grow just in terms of what we're doing. We have to grow spiritually in tune with this as well.
Thank you. Right here? Kira? Or here we go.
Thank you. My name is Natalia. And you talked about how Laudato Si really sparked climate activism. And I would like to ask the new leadership in the church, what do you think the church is going to look like? And if it doesn't have a priority for environmentalism or climate change, what can Christians do to push the institution forward?
Thank you for that question. Diana, could you take that?
Yeah. Pope Francis uplifted care for creation within the church, but I'll also note Pope Benedict also was known as the Green Church, Green Pope. The church has had teachings on care for creation that go before Pope Francis, but definitely Pope Francis was the one to uplift it and really make it very present. I think that will continue. I think we are now so actually beholden to his legacy that the next year, the next 10 years, my hope and my anticipation is that we'll only see more climate action take place within the church. I think as we look ahead to the future of the church and the new leadership, my hope is that that will only continue to be part of ongoing church teaching. But I also, recognize or want to uplift that our church is not only church leadership, but it's the church of the people. It's us, and so I feel very strongly and like to bring in this notion that we've been talking about, inspired by Teilhard, that we are on a continual journey, a continual movement, and so I trust that that the Spirit will continue to work in that space, and I trust that all of those people, all of you here, and all of those watching will continue to uplift that call.
Thanks, Diana. Thanks for that. We're getting close to the end of our time, so I'd like to ask one more question of each of you to wrap up our time together today. And Frank, maybe I'll start with you. What do you think there's one thing our audience can do in the spirit of Laudato Si to shape a church that responds to this idea that everything is connected, that's more attentive to the cry of the earth and the cry of the poor?
First of all, read and reread Laudato Si. I, particularly after listening tonight to others, realize more than ever that Laudato Si is thoroughly Teilhardian. And so when I said we needed cosmic evolutionary vision, Laudato Si does it. It gives a great framework for the church to begin to preach, to begin to teach. And I would say the one thing you could do is join some organization, urge your church to do it, find a place as a community to pursue Laudato Si.
Thank you. Sister Ilya, how about you? What's one thing people here can do?
I think read Laudato Si next to the human phenomenon. I think you need to read those two texts together. I think Teilhard would have liked Laudato Si, but what he really did find is that we have a lot of very nice ideas about the environment, but we are being formed in a medieval church. And we have to, in a sense, change the way we worship. Our prayers, our songs, our everything, our theology is still from 5th century and 12th, 13th century. It hasn't changed. And lex orandi, the law of prayer, is the law of belief. Lex credendi, and the law of belief is the law of life. So we're being shaped in one way religiously, and yet we aspire for a whole earth community outwardly. And Teilhard this is exactly what he tried to do, bring these two things together, and therefore Laudato Si has the potential to launch us into a new church.
Thank you. Sister Libby, let's go to you. What do you think one thing that we can do here today, people who are watching, to respond to this idea that everything is connected, and in particular, to respond to the cry of the earth and the cry of the poor?
I think we need hope. I think we need great hope. And in this moment where there is so much uncertainty in our world, and especially with what is the future of the church going to look like, now is the time that we who believe can be those sources of hope for the people around us, because the people around us don't need less hope. They need more, right? And so I think what Pope Francis, what I feel so much throughout Laudato Si is this belief in a better world, this belief in moving forward, and Teilhard has so much of that. But let me say, hope does not mean being just merely optimistic. Hope takes work. Hope involves suffering. You have to work towards being hopeful, and it's an active choice. So I think that's truly what each of us could do.
Thank you. Diana, help us close it out here. What do you think is one thing the audience here can do to respond to the idea that everything is interconnected, the cry of the earth, the cry of the poor?
So my call to action for everyone tonight is to, the next time you're going to buy something, whatever it is, take a beat, think about where it came from, its origins, how it was made, and think about once it's reached its lifetime with you, once you're done using it, what's going to happen to it? Where does it go? How does it decompose? Does it decompose? So remember, next time, right before you buy something, just meditate upon that for a second.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much. Before we end, first of all, it's been so good to be with all of you here in this week when we've all gone through just such a dramatic, stunning loss of Pope Francis, and such a joyful on Saturday and hope-filled, I think, send-off, walking him home with his funeral. And so it's, again, wonderful to be here in conversation with all of you and with you all here tonight. I want to preview an upcoming dialogue that we're having dedicated to remembering Pope Francis and continuing his mission, as I talked about at the beginning of our conversation. My colleague John Carr will moderate this conversation. I will join it from Rome, along with Ann Thompson, of NBC News, who will also be joining from Rome. We will have Rabbi Abraham Skorka, who is one of Pope Francis' closest friends, and as you know, here at Georgetown. Sister Norma Pimentel will be here with us at Georgetown, and is, again, Pope Francis' favorite nun. Sometimes she's called not to say that other sisters aren't his favorite as well. Andrew Prevost, who is just our wonderful colleague in the theology department here, the amateur chair in Catholic Studies. Should be a really wonderful conversation. That's next Tuesday, May 6th in Dahlgren Chapel, a Dahlgren dialogue with the Office of Mission and Ministry, opened by Father Mark Bosco. Please visit our website to RSVP to that. You can see follow-up resources to this wonderful conversation tonight at our webpage, and the discussion here will be posted on our site. And I want to especially thank our friends and colleagues at the Berkeley Center for Religion, Peace, and World Affairs for co-sponsoring this dialogue. My colleagues at the Initiative on Catholic Social Thought and Public Life, John Carr, Kim Mazik, Anna Gordon, and Christian Sunin. And of course, Kira Farrell, and Vero, I think, is here tonight. I'm not sure. There you are, Vero, for being with us tonight. And thank to all of you, most of all, for joining us both here at Georgetown and online. If you're here with us in person, please join us upstairs for a wonderful reception and to continue the conversation. And finally, thank you for helping me thank our colleagues here on the stage, Sister Ilya Delio, Frank Frost, Diana Marin, and Sister Libby Osgood for being a part of this conversation. Thank you all and have a good night. Thank you. Thank you very much for being with us.